My name is Eleanor Bennett. I'm 66 years old, and for 38 years I worked the front desk of an elementary school, which meant I spent my entire career being the person who noticed when something in a room was missing before anyone else did. An empty coat hook, an unclaimed lunchbox, a name absent from a sign-in sheet. On the Tuesday I came home from my sister's house and walked into my own living room. That same instinct told me something was wrong before my eyes even confirmed it. And what I didn't know yet was that 4 days later, a stranger's phone call was going to tell me something about my late husband that even I, after 42 years of marriage, had never known. I want to tell you about the 4 dents left in my carpet where the piano used to stand. And I want to tell you what was carved into the wood underneath its lid, in handwriting I would have recognized anywhere, that had been sitting 6 inches above my head every single time I dusted it for almost 40 years. Welcome back to MJ Drama Stories, where every story starts with silence and ends with power. If you've ever had someone decide your dream was over before you did, this one's for you. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and let's get into it. I was 24 when I started taking evening piano lessons, squeezing them in around a full-time administrative job at an elementary school. I wasn't a prodigy. I had discipline and a decent ear, and by 28, my instructor had pushed me to audition for a local college's music education program. Against fairly long odds, I got in. It wasn't a full scholarship, but it was enough to make me believe I could actually build a life around it. Teaching, playing in a community orchestra, maybe performing for a real audience just once. I kept one habit from that period that never really left me, even decades later. I still, to this day, run my finger along the top of any piano I pass, checking for dust, out of some old reflex I never quite explained even to myself. My husband Thomas used to find it endearing. He was an electrical technician who couldn't read a single note of music, but he loved watching me play more than he loved almost anything else. If you teach piano, he told me once, early in our marriage, standing in our tiny kitchen, I'll be the first in line to pay tuition, even if I never learn a thing. A month before my classes were supposed to start, the company Thomas worked for downsized, and he lost his job. Our savings drained just keeping the lights on. I withdrew my enrollment and told myself it was temporary. 1 year, and I'd go back in the fall. Thomas didn't say a word. He just held me. I didn't know yet how quickly 1 year could multiply into a lifetime without you noticing the moment it happened. It started this time with an empty room. I unlocked my own front door on a Tuesday afternoon, back from a week visiting my sister, and the living room felt wider than it should have, brighter and terrifyingly empty. The upright piano that had stood against the bay window for 38 years was simply gone. The embroidered runner, the bench with its familiar squeaky hinge, the wooden box that held my sheet music. All that remained were 4 deep indentations pressed into the rug where the brass casters used to sit. My daughter-in-law, Claire, stepped out of the kitchen with a bright, expectant smile that faltered the moment she saw my face. "Surprise," she said. "I decided it was time to refresh the space while you were away. It opens the room right up, doesn't it?" I asked her where my piano was. She told me, in a tone she clearly believed was reasonable, that she'd sold it. "You haven't played it in years," she said. "It took up half the room, it was gathering dust, and the tuner said it needed expensive work. I used the money for this." She gestured at a sleek gray sofa I hadn't asked for and didn't want. "Did you even think to ask me?" I said. "I knew you wouldn't agree," Claire said, arms crossed. "So you knew the answer," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "And you did it anyway." That phrase, "You're just overly attached to Thomas's things," was the first of several things Claire would say to me over the coming days that sounded like practicality and functioned like erasure. To understand what that piano actually meant, you have to go back to the year I quit my program. A few months after Thomas landed a new, more stable job, a delivery truck backed awkwardly into our narrow driveway. 3 men carefully maneuvered a heavy, dark mahogany upright piano through our front door. Not brand new, but beautifully kept, its wood gleaming in the afternoon light. Thomas had spent nearly the entirety of his very first bonus check on it. "We can't afford this," I told him, panic rising. "We barely caught up on the bills. Why did you buy this?" He ran his hand along the smooth fallboard. "I didn't buy it so you'd enroll in school tomorrow," he said. "I bought it so this house doesn't let you forget what you actually wanted." I sat down on the squeaky bench, hands trembling, and played the piece of a Chopin nocturne I'd learned before I quit. Thomas stood behind me with a warm hand on my shoulder. He didn't know a major chord from a minor one. He just listened until I reached the place I always had to stop. I fully intended to go back to my program, but life kept happening around that intention without ever quite consulting it. I got pregnant not long after the piano arrived. Our son Daniel was born with severe childhood asthma, endless hospital visits, mounting bills, and I kept my school job because we needed the insurance. I told myself I'd go back once Daniel started kindergarten. Then Thomas's father got sick. Then came braces and college funds and the quiet, relentless machinery of ordinary adulthood. The piano sat in the living room the whole time, a silent witness to a life steadily veering away from its original design. 12 years ago, Thomas died suddenly of a heart attack. After that, I mostly stopped touching the keys. Not because I hated the piano, but because the empty space behind the bench felt too vast to sit in alone. Standing in my living room now, staring at Claire's new sofa, I understood the loss doubled over on itself. It wasn't just wood and wire that had been hauled away in a stranger's truck. It was the last physical proof of Thomas's faith in me. And, if I'm honest, some small, stubborn hope I'd never quite let myself examine. That I might sit down at those keys again someday and find out how far I could still go. When my son Daniel came to pick up his daughter, Mia, that evening, he stopped dead in the doorway. "Where is it?" he asked, his voice already tight. Claire stepped forward, defensive but confident. "I found a buyer. It was just gathering dust." "I told you not to touch that piano," Daniel said. "You also told me she hasn't played it in a decade," Claire shot back, gesturing at the new furniture. "Look at this room. It's so much better." "It was a gift from my father," Daniel said. "It wasn't your right to sell it." "It's my job to help make this house manageable for her," Claire said, genuinely believing, I think, that she'd done me a favor. "I got a fair price. I used it for the sofa so she could actually be comfortable." "Not playing it and giving you permission to sell it," Daniel snapped, "are two entirely different things." He turned to me, caught between fury at his wife and a helpless kind of apology, but it was already too late. The piano was gone, swallowed up by a stranger's truck. For 3 days, my living room felt like a crime scene. I drank my morning coffee in the kitchen to avoid looking at the dents in the rug. Claire stayed away, convinced I was simply being stubborn and would come around to appreciating the new room eventually. Stay with me, because what happened on the 4th morning, I couldn't have planned if I'd tried. My phone rang from an unknown number. "Is this Eleanor Bennett?" a man's voice asked, careful and unhurried. "Yes, speaking." "My name is Michael Reed. I recently bought a used upright piano from a young woman who said she was clearing out her mother-in-law's house. I'm a retired music teacher. I bought it for my granddaughter, but I don't think it belongs in my house." "The sale was finalized," I said, my pulse quickening despite myself. "My daughter-in-law had no right to sell it, but the transaction is done." "It's not about the money, Mrs. Bennett," Michael said gently. When I got it home, I opened the top lid to check the tuning pins and the serial number. While I was cleaning out the dust, I found something. It's a carving. Someone took a sharp tool and etched a message directly into the wood underneath the lid. I also found a beginner's Beethoven book in the bench, with your full name written inside the cover. That's how I was able to track you down. I gripped the kitchen counter to keep the room from tilting. "What did you find?" I heard the rustle of him leaning closer to the instrument, clearing his throat before he read it exactly as written. "For Eleanor, so that one day you'll play the piece you left unfinished. Thomas." All the air left my lungs at once. I couldn't speak for what felt like a full minute. That message had been sitting there in plain sight for close to 40 years, hovering inches above the hammers and strings. I had dusted that lid 1,000 times, entirely unaware of the words underneath it. "Are you there, Mrs. Bennett?" Michael asked. "I'm here," I managed. "I never knew he wrote that." "When I called your daughter-in-law back," Michael said, "she claimed you knew it was being sold. But instruments like this have a specific weight to them. Some are meant to be sold, and some are clearly waiting for their owner to come back." He paused. "I'd like to bring it home to you. I believe your husband is still waiting for you to finish." At Daniel's insistence, Claire refunded Michael the full purchase price before he arrived with the movers the next morning. Michael refused to let me pay for delivery. Claire had made herself conveniently unavailable. Daniel took the morning off work and stood quietly by the front door as the movers guided the heavy mahogany piano back into the living room, adjusting the casters until the brass wheels settled perfectly into the 4 old indentations still crushed into the rug. When the movers left, the house went completely silent. I walked over, gripped the heavy lid with trembling hands, and pushed it back on its hinges. There, carved into the raw wood in determined, slightly uneven strokes, were the words Michael had read to me over the phone. Daniel stepped up behind me and read the inscription over my shoulder, letting out a slow, shaky breath. When did Dad write this? It must have been the day he bought it, I whispered, tracing the carved letters of my own name. What piece of music is he talking about? I opened the bench and pulled out the faded, yellowing sheet music book, flipping through until I found the Chopin Nocturne. Halfway down the second page, there was a faint pencil mark, a small slash above a measure. This one, I said. Daniel leaned in and caught the date scribbled in the corner, April 1988. He stared at it a long time. Did you ever go back to your classes, Mom? No, I said, closing the book. Life just kept happening. I watched him do the math in his head, realizing for the first time that his own timeline lined up almost exactly with the point where mine had stopped. That evening, Daniel stayed after dinner, nursing a cup of coffee, looking everywhere but at me. Did you really want to study music professionally? He finally asked. I don't know about professionally, I admitted, but I wanted to try. I wanted to see how far I could go. Did you quit because of me? I looked at my son, a grown man, an architect, a good father. I never wanted you to feel like a burden, I told him. You were part of the reason I chose the life I did. But you were not my mistake, and you were not a fault. He was quiet a long moment. Dad lost his job right before your classes started. Then I came along and got sick. You needed the insurance. He looked up at me. Do you regret it? I let the silence sit for a moment before I answered. I do not regret having you, not for a single second. That's not what I asked, Daniel said gently. For the first time in my life, I gave him the whole truth. Yes, I said. I do. He bowed his head. Not hurt, but deeply, quietly sad. The way you look when you realize you'd spent your entire life assuming someone else's sacrifice had simply been instinct, rather than a choice that cost something. I can love the life I lived, Daniel, I told him. And I can still mourn the life I didn't get to try. Those two things don't cancel each other out. He nodded slowly, finally seeing me, not only as his mother, but as a whole person who had made a very heavy choice, once, a long time ago, and carried it quietly ever since. The following week, my 12-year-old granddaughter, Mia, dropped a crumpled flyer on my kitchen counter for adult piano lessons at the community center. You should go, she said, hands on her hips. Mia, sweetheart, I'm 66 years old. She tilted her head, echoing her grandfather's exact stubbornness without ever having met him. Well, will you be any younger next year? I couldn't argue with that. The next day, I walked into a classroom run by a piano teacher named Sofia Ramirez, 52, sharp-eyed, and immediately unimpressed by the stiffness in my hands. The first few weeks were agonizing. My fingers refused to stretch the way they used to. Reading notes felt like translating a forgotten language. One afternoon, after I butchered a simple scale, I slammed my hands down on the keys. I can't do it. My hands are too slow. Sophia leaned against the piano, unbothered. You're frustrated because you're trying to play like a 28-year-old woman. Isn't the goal to get back to where I was? No, she said flatly. The goal is to start from exactly where you are today. That single sentence changed everything. I stopped trying to erase the 40-year gap and started working with the hands I actually had. I practiced 30 minutes a day on Thomas's piano. Slowly, the nocturne began to take shape again. After 3 months, I played the whole piece for Sophia without stopping. She didn't applaud. She just checked her clipboard. Don't play it alone in your living room anymore, she said. There's a community recital in 6 months. I'm putting you on the schedule. I tried to back out for weeks, citing my age, my nerves, my arthritic joints. She ignored every excuse. The recital stayed on the calendar. On the evening of the recital, I seriously considered faking the flu. Instead, I put on my black dress and drove to the community center. Daniel and Mia sat in the front row. Claire sat one seat away from them. I hadn't told her not to come. When my name was called, I walked across the stage and sat at the grand piano. It wasn't Thomas's old upright, but his words were carved permanently into my memory the same way they'd been carved into that wood. I opened my sheet music. In the top corner, my name was still there, in my own handwriting. Eleanor, April 1988. I placed my hands on the keys and began. The first few notes were shaky. Halfway through, my left hand lagged, and I nearly paused, but I heard Thomas's voice in my memory, steady as it always was. Just keep playing. I pressed on. As I reached the middle of the second page, my eyes tracked toward the faint pencil mark, the exact spot where I'd stopped learning 40 years ago, the place where my music had ended and my life as a mother had begun. I reached the mark. I didn't stop. I turned the page, and I kept playing. When I struck the final chord, the room filled with applause. Daniel was the first on his feet, crying openly. He finally understood that the pencil mark had been the exact point where my life detoured, and that turning the page, all these decades later, was my way back. In the lobby afterward, Daniel hugged me tightly. Claire approached quietly, her eyes red. "I'm so sorry," she said, and this time she didn't add a justification behind it. "I convinced myself you were done with it, because that made what I did easier to live with." "I understand why you thought that," I told her. "But the only person who gets to decide if a dream is over is the person who dreamed it." She nodded, and for the first time, I believe she actually understood. I wasn't just somebody's mother or somebody's mother-in-law, defined entirely by the furniture other people decided I no longer needed. I was Eleanor, and for the first time in 40 years, I was ready for whatever came after the last page. Some dreams aren't dead just because they've gone quiet for a while. Sometimes they're simply waiting for you to come back and finish the piece. That's my story. If it meant something to you, drop a comment and tell me. I read every one. And if you want more stories like this, hit subscribe to MJ Drama Stories because there's another one waiting for you next week.